Welcome to Rhythm and Rome, where we are exploring cultural differences, similarities, misconceptions, and all craziness in between. So I am your host, Trecia, and I'm here with my friends, Benef and Paul. Great to see you guys. How you
Hello.
doing? Hope you had a
Bonjour.
great week. So before we get started our discussion here today, wanted to do some housekeeping and just wanted to remind you to subscribe so you can catch all our great episodes. Don't forget to look us up where you can follow us on YouTube, you can follow us on Instagram and TikTok. Looking forward to connecting with you and certainly answering any questions that you have. So guys, today, what are we doing? We're discussing cultural differences. So Vanessa, I know
Ooh,
you
sounds
have
like a
some in,
serious topic.
right? Well, can be.
Yes.
It can be to some point. But Benef, why don't you lead us into this? What are we talking about today about cultural differences?
Yes. So specifically Asia, because prior to moving to Korea and Japan, and we ended up spending like 7 years in Korea and Japan, I didn't know anything about Asia. And in fact, I could not tell the difference between Japanese, Koreans, or Chinese. Like if you were to line them up, I would have been like, they're all the same. If you would have been like, tell me the difference between the languages, I would have been like, it all sounds the same to me. I mean, very, very ignorant. Okay, I'm going to admit that I could not tell the difference between Japanese, Korean, and Chinese. But after living there for 7 years, they are so different. I
Mhm.
mean, the only thing they have in common is that they all eat rice and use chopsticks. Like, other than that, the food is different. The clothing is different. Obviously, the language is different. It sounds very different. Just the way they approach foreigners is different. Like the hospitality is different. And so it's incredible. And I just want to talk about that because if people don't travel to Asia or they don't study Asia, I mean, like me, they probably aren't going to know how different these cultures really are. And you've got East Asia, and then you've got Southeast Asia, and they're all very, very, very different. So I did an interview with my son and his girlfriend because they pretty much grew up overseas. I mean, they were going to American schools, but still, just like living in Japan, living in Korea, and just having recently moved back to the States to attend college, I wanted to know what were some of the major differences that they noticed, having moved back for the first time in quite some time.
Must be a shock.
well, well, yeah. I mean, it is just because the Japanese operate differently than the Koreans. Um, and that's, and like understanding that history between those two countries in that region is very, very important to understand the political tensions that they still have today, and just the way that they interact with each other, the two governments. And so
Right.
Yeah.
it's been fascinating. It really has.
So yeah.
But yeah.
Why don't we just have a look at it and see what's
Okay.
up?
Yeah.
Okay. So you guys spent most of your life, like childhood, in either Korea, Japan, or overseas. And so now that you've moved back to the States, I was wondering, like, have you noticed any differences, cultural differences, things that took you by surprise?
So one thing that I would say is definitely a shock from living overseas to living in America is that I feel like the people, first of all, the people are a lot different in that they're louder, they talk more.
All right. That was actually pretty interesting to hear a
Mhm.
perspective, especially from their generation. And I don't mean to like be weirded out by saying their generation. They're obviously younger than we
They
are.
are a lot younger. It was interesting because he said the same thing that Seb said about Americans being
Mhm.
loud and talking more. So I found that funny because
And
And
that's
it's
obviously,
good.
yeah,
Mhm.
and that's speaking from Americans, right?
I was
So
just about to say that an American is saying an American is loud and didn't even go into what state, but that was interesting.
all
Um,
states, I think it's all states.
but I'm curious on the cultural because I too also And I will get into my experience from when I was living in Korea during my time, working in the military and the government and stuff like that. But just curious to hear like what the more onto the specific differences that, yep, we were loud, we're this and that, but obviously you guys didn't look like them. and
True.
and curious, you know, looking in mind when folks are coming to visit there that are of different nationality and stuff like that. Was there
Mhm.
anything that stood out that they were concerned with that, you know, uh, they wanted, to touch on or more interested in?
I mean, I think, well, the Japanese are very accommodating. They're very helpful. They're
Mm,
very excited to have tourists come, and they will help you. They're very kind. And the Koreans are as well. They're maybe a little bit more abrupt in their speech. They're more like Americans when they
mm,
talk, versus the
mm.
Japanese are more um how do I say, they just like, they don't want to offend you. Like, they really don't want to say anything that's gonna like upset you. And the Koreans just, they don't care about that.
One of the things, Benef, that I believe it was your son, or maybe it was his significant other,
Mhm.
was talking about what, other than the pollution. I'm curious to find out if you guys notice what are some things that are in Asia, and I can tell you some that I have that make you go, hmm. So you need to
Yeah,
know this before you go.
in particular, so I have a good friend, and he's an avid bike rider, and he's been, unfortunately, he's been in several accidents with vehicles. And in Japan, it was interesting because he said that he would be in the middle of the street like bleeding, and they would
Mm.
just like drive around him. Like, no one would stop to help. And I
No.
was like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, you're, and they, but no, because it's like they don't want to be liable. And I don't know, I don't think there's like a good Samaritan law there. So if
How do
you
you become
try to help
liable?
someone, and that person dies, like, you could be held liable. Yeah.
Oh.
And that, I
Oh,
mean,
okay.
yeah, so they will be like, oh, it's their time. And I was like, but I'm thinking, what if it's a kid, but I don't know. But in
Exactly.
Korea, when
That's
he would be,
crazy.
I
That's
know.
wild.
I never got a straight answer because I didn't really know how to ask that question. People were like, "What?" But in Korea, they would rush to help him. So, there was
Mhm,
that difference between the Japanese and the Koreans, which I just didn't understand. Like, how can you not help someone in need?
mhm. Of
But I
course.
had
Right.
heard, maybe it was an urban legend of like an American driving, probably a service member, and found a body part and reported it, and then was like held liable for the death of that person. That could be an urban legend, but it was stuff like that that
Sure.
makes
This
you
was, yeah,
go,
it's things that make you
uh
go, "Hmm," is definitely
yeah,
because
that's
I mean,
definitely
I think
weird.
that's something to like tag on if somebody is going to be traveling there who have never been to Asia
Well,
before or
right,
something
you
like
might want
this
to
because
be, I mean, because you just don't, and those are things you just don't know. Like, how would you know that that's a thing not to do, not to help someone? Because
Okay, well
you could be
here's
held
the thing
liable if
too.
things don't go well.
Mhm.
So when things go wrong here in America, in the United States, what exactly do we do? We pull out our phones. Does anyone pull out their phone to record it?
Well, nowadays, yeah, that's
Oh,
definitely
yeah,
what, well, it depends.
right.
It depends on, like, if it's an accident, I probably wouldn't. But if it's something where I know it's going to escalate to
Yeah, but I'm not
something
talking about
else,
you. I'm just talking about someone else in general. Would that
They
happen?
certainly are going to record it. That, yeah,
or
and our
viewership, I guess.
society is very litigious. Like, we want to sue
Mm,
everybody. So
Great.
mm,
that's like evidence, you
Right. So
know?
yeah.
I'm just thinking that if you were probably, if especially if you're not traveling solo, I would think that someone else would do that. So I guess
Yeah.
if you're traveling in Asia, make sure you go in tandem so that you can record if in case something happens. But
Oh
Well,
my
I
not
mean,
only
never
that,
want
gosh.
to
just
put
make
that
sure
as
you
a
go in
preference.
tandem. Yeah, make sure you go in tandem in case if you do get injured, somebody's there to help
Someone
you.
is there to help you. That would
Oh
probably, I
my
mean,
gosh.
that's probably would be best in all situations. But
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
Always have a battle
once you have
buddy.
some, But we
Yeah,
do
I
have a lot
mean,
of solo
it's
travelers.
look, I've never experienced that when I was living in Korea, but I can tell you, in France, when it comes to, since we're going on to the injury report kind of thing, I know I was injured in France. I remember I dislocated my shoulder, and I had nobody. I just came here 6 months into coming here and stuff like that, and dislocated my shoulder. And I did obviously don't speak the language very well at the time, and my neighbor, thank God, she speaks very good, fluent English. And we called the ambulance, and it took, like, my shoulder was out of place for an hour. An ambulance did not show up for almost an hour.
An hour.
Almost an hour.
Oh
Yes.
my
Well,
gosh.
And
Like,
then I got to
It's wild.
I got to the hospital and waited and waited.
yeah.
And then they
Okay,
finally got to
so-
me.
I mean, I'm assuming they were just doing the triage. I mean, if you had like an life, limb, or eyesight situation, they would have shown up quicker.
Yeah, but I mean, when you dislocate your shoulder, I don't know if anybody's ever done that
Yeah,
before.
no.
It's hitting nerves, and then you get nerve damage. But the situation is the fact that regardless, it took forever. And I did witness, another funny tale, literally someone getting hit by a car here in France. We were walking home, me and my friends, and all of a sudden, an older guy, and we're talking about he was probably in his 70s, he got hit by a car. And the ambulance took almost an hour to come. And oh, by the way, the
Okay,
ambulance truck
that's
is around the
excessive.
corner.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do they just
yeah.
not
So,
have the funding, or like, is it,
I
Is
don't
it-
know.
or the resources? I
It
don't know.
just
Okay,
put
I
me in
feel-
mind with what you were just talking about with in Japan. So I was just like,
okay, I think we have to stop right here and say, okay, let's say the emergency numbers. So in case we're traveling in the United States, it's 911, 911.
well,
And in France, it's what? What's the number you dial
well,
for emergencies?
112, and then there's some other numbers too as well. Because you don't do
Don't-
112 if it's non-emergency, it's a long ass number, which I don't know.
If it's an
But-
emergency, it's a longer number than it is for
No, if it's
non-emergent.
not emergency, if it's not an
okay.
emergency, like
okay.
non-emergency type of
Yeah.
things. But 112 is usually you go and you'll talk to somebody, and then they'll probably tell you call
They'll
this
direct
number.
you.
Yeah,
Got
or
it.
something
And then
like
Benef,
this.
where would you say in Korea or Asia?
I
Where
have
number?
to
Do you remember?
look. I don't
But if
know.
anything,
I
we
have to
can
look.
we can
We'll put it in.
always
We'll put it in comments. We'll put it in
Exactly, we
comments.
can
Yeah,
put it in the
I want to
comment
say it's
section.
like 119. I don't even know. That was part of the problem. I never actually
Yeah.
I
knew.
just figured since
what
we,
the
we
number
got on
was.
this topic, we need to let folks know.
No,
It's
that's a
an
good point,
emergency number.
Tricia. That's a good
Are they
point.
going to
But
come? Well, we don't know, but at least you have the number.
I don't even know
Well,
if I
Public
should
Enemy-
get mad.
Public
I
Enemy
don't
was
even
right.
know. Yeah.
911's a joke, and apparently 112 is as well.
I don't know if, but honestly, I don't know if I should be upset or just laugh, Benef, at the fact of what you just said, because thank God I don't think any of us had to worry about such a serious situation ever before. But with all jokes
Right.
aside, it just mind boggles me. Even though, yes, your kids have said that, yeah, it's safe, and all this other stuff. But of course, pollution is an issue too as well.
One of the things I noticed was that while being in Korea, the air pollution is a lot worse compared to the States. But on litter and everything, the States is definitely worse compared to Korea.
And that worries me too as well. Someone that has asthma, is that going to be something
Yeah.
that's going to be
Well,
an
and it
issue
was
or not?
particular in Korea, the air pollution. And it's not just the air coming over from China. It's also the Koreans themselves have their own pollution. And that's a real issue. Like, how are they going to clean that up? Because it would be so bad. I mean, and I don't, like, the numbers would be out of control. Like, say 20 is normal, it would be like 140 or 100 and something. And to the point where
Gosh.
like they would be advising you to wear masks. They wouldn't be able to have practice outside, like sports practices outside. And like I couldn't see across the street. And it wasn't fog.
Wow.
I mean, it was like the smog to where I couldn't see the house.
Oh, I
across,
remember
and it
that in
just
Korea.
stinks
That's
too,
definitely a
Wow.
true.
So there's definitely no laws of pollution. There's nothing.
I
There's
feel,
nothing.
I mean, that's a good question because they've got to have
I think it's more lax than it
something.
is in the
Yeah,
States.
maybe
It's
it's more
not that
lax.
they don't have
Yeah.
any. It's just because I remember even when I was in Korea, they're burning trash or whatever it is, and it's just going up in the rice paddies and stuff like this. And
Right.
I don't know if you remember Benef, but like the rice paddies, it's the fertilizer, it's manure
Yes.
and
I know. Well,
stuff.
that's not the smell though. The smell is coming from, I mean,
Kimchi.
it's industrial pollution, not just like
Correct. That's what I'm
fertilizer.
saying. Yeah.
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 And a lot of
No,
it is coming over from China as well, especially if you're on that western side. So,
So
but
what would you tell someone who's, because Japan is also a very popular destination, not only for Americans, but just in general. I guess you've been there 7 years, like you said, some do's and don'ts. When people who literally have never been to Japan, because I'm one of those people, and I do say it is on my bucket list of something that I want to
yeah,
do.
Absolutely.
What would you say your top 3 do's and
top
don'ts
3.
if
All right.
you weren't there before?
So let's see. Well, one thing I just find interesting, I don't know whether this is 1, 2, or 3, but like in Japan, they don't have any public trash cans. So if you want to throw something away, you need to take it with you back to the hotel or back to wherever you're staying. Yeah, we're always looking you could see the tourists because they'll be looking for trash cans. They just don't have any ever since the
Right.
sarin gas incident in the subway in the early 90s.
Can you go
So,
to
and
a fast food restaurant and throw the garbage there,
well,
or
yeah, well, I mean, actually they probably wouldn't throw their personal trash there. They would literally bring their personal trash like home with them.
interesting?
Which is
Huh.
interesting because I'm just not prepared to do that. And even it like when we'd be walking our dog, like I'd have the doggy bag, but then there's no trash can to put the poop in. And so like I gotta bring it back with me. Like
Oh,
that's so weird. So I would
that's
be
so
the person
nasty.
like I'd be like poop in the leaves. And
That's
if no one's
different.
looking, I'd like kick some leaves over because I'm like, I don't want to take it home. Like, ew. So that, but it's such a clean country, despite the fact that there is no public trash cans. You don't see any litter, no roadkill. I would be like, do they even have animals? Because I never saw roadkill.
Do
Like,
you get a
or
fine
someone's
if you
coming up and cleaning it immediately.
do
Huh?
you get a fine? Do you get a fine if they see you?
I don't know. I think rather than a fine, it would just be like the public shame of the fact that you're breaking the
Mm,
rules.
mhm.
Because
Right.
they're
Right.
very big rule followers, and as a collective, which is why everyone wore masks during COVID. It wasn't a problem.
Yeah.
It was just like, you know, follow
Because I
the
know in
rules. That's the other.
Singapore, yeah, you can't even spit on the street in
No
Singapore.
gum chewing. I couldn't buy
No
any
gum
gum in
chewing.
Singapore, and I didn't know that. I'm not looking for gum. All they have is mints.
Yeah.
I will say that in Japan, follow the rules.
Mhm.
Korea, they're less rule followers. Japan,
Yes.
gotta follow the
Yeah.
rules. Koreans will break the rules. They don't care as much.
Just their
I think
traffic alone is a broken rule.
yes. So I think like as an American, like in Korea, you might feel a little more at ease because it's less they're just societal wise, they're less rigid for tourists. I mean, the Japanese, they're very like everyone follows the rules. So,
Very regimented.
you
Yeah.
don't
in
want to
the-
be
in
that
the
one
drive.
that's like talking too loud on the train because then they might like look at
Mm.
you straight. Or, like my husband, he was on a bus to the airport and he wasn't wearing the seatbelt. I mean, it's a bus. Who
Mm.
wears the seatbelt on a bus? But this woman like took the time to like put in her Google Translate, you must wear the seatbelt or on the highway.
Whoa.
It's the
That's
rule.
wild. Wow.
And he was like, okay.
Funny you mention that because in Germany, I used to get like, the train is coming by and you have to stop your car, you're in your car. I literally a couple of times had someone get out of their car behind me telling me to turn my engine off because you're supposed to turn your engine off when a train is going by because of
Oh,
pollution.
wow. Okay.
Yes. It's
Wow.
normally the older Germans that would do that.
Yeah.
Right.
Literally knocked on my window, was like, I was like, what is he talking about? And then he's like, turn off. Okay. And then you start it back up when the train,
That's interesting.
yeah, it's just,
Well, just just because we asked before, I just kind of want to interject here. I actually looked up to see what policies were in place for Japan, specifically, since
Mm.
that's really who we're speaking on. And Japan enacted the Air Pollution Control Act in 1968. And the act sets the emission standards for air pollutants such as soot and smoke, volatile organic compounds, particulate matter, and mercury. So it doesn't necessarily say,
Hmm.
well, it
What
says to
is
No,
be
their
they
enforced
pollution?
first by
they
stationary
have
sources such as
stricter.
factories and workplaces. So
No, the
yes, they do
Japanese have
have,
stricter laws. Yeah, their laws are a
right,
lot more strict versus the
right,
Koreans. So I think that because the Japanese, their air was cleaner.
right. And then I looked up the Korean because I wanted to make sure that we had that. And of course, we're talking about South Korea, right? So
Yeah.
it says as of 2020, so we're in 2024, but as of 2020, South Korea enforces regulatory limits on 11 air pollutants and 32 hazardous air substances, um, which are up from 11 air pollutants and 18 hazardous air substances in the previous bill. So,
Yeah, but of course they're not going to give percentages or anything like that because that's
well,
the
no,
yeah.
yeah. So,
It's
yeah,
just
they have apparently they have 61 coal-fired plants that are one of the main contributors to the air pollution. 61.
Okay. And
yeah.
it seemed to be worse in the winter and in the spring, um, from my
And that
experience. But yeah, I I
just
mean,
wanted to
but
sit there.
it's just interesting,
Yeah.
like the
But
fact that
I'd be curious to
go ahead.
find out what others would think, and what are their experiences of whoever, if there's anybody that's either listening in or anything like that, drop a comment on if they've been to any of these Asian countries. What are your experience on any do's and
Well,
don'ts traveling
yeah,
there?
because I do want to bring up because like in the video she mentioned, feeling unsafe in America
Hmm.
versus Japan or Korea.
Glad you brought that
And I
up.
As a woman living in the States, I definitely feel more unsafe here compared to where I did like in Asia countries like Korea, especially with like the recent shooting going around and other horror stories about sex trafficking and things like that.
Brought that
and I
up.
will
Yep.
say that I did feel very safe in Japan and Korea, but she specifically
As a
talked
woman.
about yeah, as a woman, talked about sex trafficking here in the States. And I
Yeah,
just
that was
found
interesting.
that interesting because when I think about sex trafficking, I'm not thinking about Japan, Korea. I'm thinking more Southeast Asian countries like Thailand,
Mhm.
Vietnam, Cambodia, but I don't often think about the United States. And that just could be my naivete on that,
No, we got
I
it too
just,
as well. It's just not as heavy
yeah.
as
Yeah,
Taiwan
well,
or
unfortunately, where
not
I
Taiwan,
live
sorry,
here,
Thailand.
yeah, and unfortunately, where I live here in Texas, Houston is number one,
Hmm.
you know, number one city for trafficking, and
And
and I
and
believe
where and these
California.
where are they coming from? Where are I don't I like that's the part
Usually
I
they're
don't.
coming through the border, usually.
Exactly, coming in through the border,
Okay, from
just yeah,
Central and South America.
Hmm.
Okay.
hmm
Okay.
yep.
Yeah.
And
And
unfortunately, you'll find too that there's a lot of, if we're talking about cultural differences and we're talking about religion, it's believe it or not, it's a lot of churches, no matter what denomination, someone has some type of organization, and I'm talking in the Houston area, that has to deal with trafficking and
mm,
has some ministry that's involved in that because it is so big here.
Wow.
that's
Well,
Now,
and the
insane.
other
does it mean that if you're out on the street and, I mean, there's definitely a demographic, right? So there's definitely what they're looking for, but it's something to be concerned about, right? So,
Well, for
Big time.
sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the other thing that I mean, my son brought up was the homeless population
yes,
and I've definitely noticed, since moving back, how just prevalent it is, and that's sad and disturbing. But we just didn't see that overseas. Now, I don't know if that's because they're doing a better job or if it's because the homeless people, they have more shame put upon them culturally, and so they hide
Yeah, I was
themselves.
gonna say, could it be just because we don't see it?
Yeah,
Could it be because they're hiding it
right.
and they literally just push them away and just ignore their rights? You know what I mean? Because I see that
Mhm.
sometimes in certain areas, even heck, I can even say, well, I was gonna say I could say France, but I can see it even when I go to like um um Switzerland, for example. Like I rarely see, homeless people, within the areas. I mean, of course they have them and so on. Even in Luxembourg City, where I lived, Benef, you visited me there too as well.
Yeah, I don't
I
remember
don't think
seeing.
you remember seeing any homeless in the whole area. I think I saw one homeless person that was laying in the streets, and he didn't even look that homeless because he was dressed and so on, but he was asking for money and stuff. But I'm always curious by that because I'm wondering other countries, do they just ignore their rights and they just push them away and just hide it so that it's better viewed upon when for tourism and stuff like this, so you don't get all that situation and so on. But that was interesting that they did pick up on that and noticed it.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I
And
do feel
yeah,
like the Asian countries, or at least the ones that Japan and Korea, they will put more shame on an individual than maybe we have here in the States. Like
and that's
the
crazy to
culture,
me. Like, what does that mean?
yeah.
Like, put more shame. Where do they
Yeah.
go then? Do they put them in the gutter or and I'm not
No,
trying to
well,
make this
like
a homeless
cultural
talk,
shame
but
so that you behave a certain way, I mean, it's like if you go to prison, the family has to then provide for you while you're in prison. So it's not
Okay.
like they got to bring you the food, and it's a burden on the family too if you go to prison. Whereas here it's like,
oh, that
oh,
sucks. Because what
Oh,
happens
I
but
if you're
see
from
that,
a
know.
rich family versus a poor family? That means you don't
right,
eat?
right.
I'm not 100% sure, but it's certainly different. It's a
Wow.
different
That's
system.
definitely something. That is definitely something to put on it, because I mean, here it's
Wow.
the taxpayers, right? Taxpayers in the
Yeah,
United States
yeah.
paying for
Well,
all the
I mean,
prisoners.
they have a higher suicide rate in Japan and Korea because it's not looked upon as shameful to take one's life. It's looked upon as something that you're doing out of honor for your family.
Correct. It's
As
not to
I
shame.
understand it, it's not the same. I
That's
mean, and that could
insane.
be religious portions of it too,
Yeah, yeah.
because in the Christian religion, it's a sin to take your own
Mm.
life.
Well,
I
I
don't
would
know
think it
that
was.
that's
I would
It's
think it's because
selfish,
it's
considered
a
selfish.
collective. Yes, because it's a it is, everyone has their place in community, right? Because of those, in that part of the world. So if you're not seeing as doing your part, or you're
Mm.
seeing as not being that positive, influence or light on your family, then yes, it's a total disgrace.
Mm.
So it's very much tied into the family love is very much tied into doing the right thing.
No,
Yeah, no,
I
that's
see that.
true.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
so
it's very
that's
much about the collective,
mhm,
and that's different. Even the way they make decisions, like within the government agencies. So when I
Mm.
was in the military, would have to do negotiations for different programs, and so they would make decisions, as a collective. Whereas Americans, there's one person that's identified as the decision maker. Yeah, it
That's
was just,
insane.
and we don't get any training at all. At least the army doesn't get any training. They're just like, go do negotiations. But we're like, I don't know anything about Japanese
Figure it
culture.
out. Figure it out.
They're fit for it. Figure it the fuck out. Like,
Hmm.
okay. And they're very different, and we'd be like, oh, let's do A, B, and C. And they're like, oh, it's difficult. And we're like, well, how can we make it easier? But they were like, no, difficult means we don't want to do it. Or
well,
Man.
no,
Benef,
they don't want to say
yeah.
no. So they're like, it's difficult. Whereas, like, and I had a friend who did trilateral. So he was working with Koreans, Japanese, and Americans, and like the Koreans would be like, the Japanese are lying because they're saying it's difficult. They're saying something that's not the straight answer because they don't, that'd be offensive. They're
Mm.
not going to say it like that. And
Right.
the Japanese would be like, the Koreans are lying because they're saying this is fucking bullshit. And they're like, oh, nobody would say that. Why would you? That's
And that's
offensive.
the cultural differences again.
Yeah,
Um,
between
but
the two.
let me add in also, because I also found it curious also from what they discussed on crime, that they felt a lot more safer. Because it draws me back to, because I said it already in other, podcasts that we already done. I do feel obviously safer anywhere outside of US, specifically a lot of times
Yeah.
in Europe than anywhere else. So it's interesting at the age that they are that they've noticed things like this too as well. And is it because they feel no one is bothering them on the street? Because I don't know how. Well, I guess she did say about sex trafficking is not an issue there versus the state. So hence
Yeah.
why that's why she
Or
feels
it's not so
safer.
overt. Yeah. I
Right.
don't know if it's not an
I
issue,
just,
but yeah.
I mean, I guess we don't see, or we didn't see the violent crimes that we see in
Mhm.
America. So we didn't see lots of shootings.
Mhm.
It's very rare, or lots of rapes. I mean, the things that we heard about with rape usually involved a U.S. service member, unfortunately.
Mm.
So it, and then like I had a friend who left her purse on the train at the Tokyo station or at the airport station, one of the two. Like literally just left it there.
Mm.
And they, but it was when her husband went to retrieve it, it was someone had turned it in to the lost and found, like completely intact.
Yeah. And I
Didn't
can
even
say the
open it.
same. I've experienced something like that here in Paris, of all places, in Charles de Gaulle
All places.
Airport. And yeah, I
Very
literally
nice.
forgot, when you go through the conveyor belt thing and you take all your jewelry
Mhm.
off and everything like that. I left
Mhm.
my iWatch, my iPhone, and my passport in the stupid
Wow.
bin thing. Yeah. And I was so nervous and scared. And next thing you know, the security person came and brought it to me where I was in the terminal.
But would
And
you
this was
have
after an hour of
an
waiting.
hour? But do you think that would have
Wow, that's
happened if you
long.
had been on the subway?
Oh, in Paris?
Yeah.
Actually, yes, it would,
Oh, do you
because
think
I
they would have
have
returned your
Hmm.
stuff?
no. I've seen someone who left a wallet before on the metro, and this was late. Now it could be because he was a good person, but
Yeah, I mean that
but
clearly he
but
was. I
yeah,
mean,
he was a good person, and I did see it just that one time. But no, I don't think that would happen on the metro, because the metro in Paris is a very big issue here because there's a lot of pickpocketers and
So I was
and
gonna
and
say, I
and,
mean,
and so on, and yeah, in Paris. So yes,
yeah,
you're right. It would not happen on a train in Paris or anything
right.
like this.
yeah.
So but it's interesting that eh, I think the every one of us can easily say whenever we travel outside of the states, which is probably not, as Americans, doesn't bode well for us, that we feel a lot more safer, even whether we're a person of color or just in general outside of America, we feel a lot safer. And I don't know what that means. And that's kind of
Again,
embarrassing and
I
scary.
I mean, again, I think it has everything to do with the fact that and maybe it's because and I'm totally reaching here. The only thing I
Mm,
can think of is that here in the United States, we have different states. So there's different societal things. There are different communities. There's a lot of different things, and it's vast. It's large.
Yeah.
And we have different cultures. We have different,
but
everything.
we have that in every other
We
country. There's
no, I
different
know
states
that,
in France,
but no, and I get it. But for the most part, they're French, right? Or they're Spanish, or so there is a
Yeah.
cultural something. American means a lot of things. It means a lot of different things. Do you see what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
so I feel like
The
community
melting pot.
and yes, and America's very individualistic. A lot of European countries, Asian countries, whatever, are very community based. So, or community thought,
Yeah.
if you will. So I think
I,
you
I
know,
would
we have to
slightly
look at that.
challenge you and just say that instead of
Really?
materialistic, we are materialistic, but we're also more capitalist society. So
Absolutely.
it's all about,
Yes. Again,
if
me. It's all
my
about me.
money, yeah,
Individualistic. Yes,
because I
that's what
got
I said.
money and I got
Individualistic.
this and it's nothing bothering me. Okay, fine. Everything else goes
Right.
out the
It's
window
right.
versus
And
as a collective somewhere else, they're looking at,
And then just in
Well,
light and in jest, I think when we're on vacation, we tend to, again, as Americans on vacation, we tend to
mm,
be a little bit more, free, if you will. So we feel like, oh,
when you
the
say
world's our
free, you're talking
oyster.
about us. We're just being assholes.
No, I'm talking about us being able to let our hair down.
No,
We're
I mean,
not
yeah,
here. So
but
we're experiencing
I
and
guess what I'm
so
saying is
you tend
when
to
we're
have your
free,
guard down a little bit,
no,
right?
no,
And
we
people
do, but
know, people
we
know we're
still
American.
are Americans, right? We still go into another
Yeah.
country, letting our guards down.
But I don't
No,
want
this
to,
is
and Benef, I
interesting.
really want to go back to the safety because that really hit home for me. Thing is we've made light of a lot of things thus far in what we talked about, but it was very interesting the seriousness what the young people brought up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
and I just really want to touch on the safety as women. That was something that was very poignant. Not to
Mm,
mention just in Mina, but Cameron also came up with that. I mean, he brought that point up as well
Yeah.
yeah.
of the safety factor. And I don't know if it's just because of his girlfriend, his significant other, whatever that circumstances are, but that's a concern. But I find that a little. I don't know. I was trying to wrestle with that when I was listening to that. That
Mm,
I mean,
mm,
that struck a chord with me. That hurt me. That so
Yeah.
young,
Yeah.
you know, that is such a thing,
okay.
I mean, we were
you know.
Can we?
sheltered
Yeah.
from the chaos that happened, at the whole, with the George Floyd shooting, with all the other mass shootings, with the Capitol. Like we weren't there for that. And then like they come back, and within 6 months of being at school, there's a shooting on campus. I mean, that's
Mm,
just like reality set in. Like, oh, the world, at least my part of it, isn't safe. And
yeah.
it was just like
Right,
shit, because it is a big country, so there's unfortunately shootings happening pretty regularly around the United States, and to have one happen in the exact place that you are, it's like, well,
right,
damn. I mean,
right.
that's really,
Yeah.
it just sort of, they
Unfortunately,
were really
we're getting
shooken up
immune
from
to
that.
it, and we're getting immune to it and stuff. And Trisha, I don't want to put you on the spot either, but you did. I thought you had mentioned something about um you or your daughter or someone that was traveling also overseas, not in
Right.
Asia, but I didn't know if that was because it was in light of what we're talking about with Benef and her kids and what their experience was. We're talking about cultural differences and certain things,
Hmm.
and I'm sure she probably going to be interviewed on it and stuff like that too as well, and get to
Yeah,
hear from her. But I
definitely.
didn't know if that was something you were interested in touching on or holding off until we can cut this part out too if you want.
Well, no, I mean, I mean, she did definitely mention to me. I mean, I can definitely preface what she said. I mean, I'd love for you to hear her thoughts on it, straight away. But she just basically said that she was very aware,
Mhm.
of the differences. Now, did that stop her from having a good time, or did that really, and she didn't feel it as much in Ireland. It was when she actually got to England, that
Mm.
there was, that she felt
Doesn't surprise me.
that, yeah, that she felt, that there was a difference.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That
England
there,
is a sister of America.
yes, it is. So,
So it doesn't
and
surprise me.
I mean, of course, her being who she is and as resilient as she is, no, I mean, that's not a factor for her. She has the same kind of mentality as I do. I want to travel to as many places as I can so that I can introduce myself to other people,
Yeah,
right?
of course.
And what that is, and to change whatever perception that they have, or let them think of a different perspective. But in particular, yes. In
Yeah.
Ireland, not so much. But England was definitely there. So
Mm.
yeah, I'm looking forward to sharing that with you so that you can hear from her directly.
Okay. No, that's interesting and so on.
All right, so Benef, I think we definitely said here that or what we found is that there are very stark differences
For
Yeah.
um,
sure.
of our of living in Asia and definitely on the day to day there. And first of all, we want to thank your we want to thank your son and his girlfriend for being a part of the show,
Yeah, this
and
was
giving us
really
their
enlightening.
opinion. Yeah, it definitely was. I know it's more serious than we even thought it was going to be, but I still
Yeah.
think it was very
But
good.
it's great, and it was
and
great to hear from a young generation perspective on this.
Right.
So, and
exactly,
it's not too far from
exactly,
what we were thinking.
Generation Alpha, right? Yeah.
It's something.
exactly.
I
It's
can't keep
something.
up.
But yes, definitely, and certainly, having heard some things from my daughter as well. So we definitely want to, thank the younger generation for chipping in there.
I have
Um,
hope.
we do have hope. We do have hope. But yeah, definitely. I just really want to throw it to you guys out there. Give us some comments and some things, some do's and don'ts. If you've traveled in those, in that part of the world, and you have some things that maybe we didn't cover, or things that we should probably discuss in future shows, we'd love to get your opinion on that. And definitely give us some comments on what you've experienced, so that we can share that with others. Possibly in another episode. Also, we definitely want to close out the show, and remind you to definitely subscribe, tell all your friends. We definitely want you to be a part of what we do here, and we look forward to doing the show for you, and definitely encompassing what you also have in mind as well. As we do, it seems like, as what we're going to do now is customary
Yes.
when we close out this show, is that we are going to toast you, toast our experiences,
Something.
and just say, hey,
Cheers.
Empty.
Somebody drank off everything
somebody
already.
drank everything over
We
there.
know
But
who's
for
the
those
alcohol.
who still have their glass, we're going to say cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks,
Prost.
everything.
Get